You're listening to Lighthouse Conversations, brought to you by Lighthouse Haven, a spiritual home for your awakening soul. Lighthouse Conversations is a show where awakening souls gather to be inspired, connected, and enlightened. Spiritual spark plug and host Chelly Canales, that's me, will guide you through the twists and turns of your journey to a safe haven where you are finally free to live your best light. Each episode contains a conversation with a guest who has gone through a spiritual awakening, detailing their unique and life-changing experiences in an intimate and candid way. Although everyone's experience is as unique as they are, we all share one common thread. We're all seeking something. So, come join us on this journey and be prepared to leave with resources that will supercharge you into inspired action. Here's today's episode. Hello, my friends, my awakening souls. I'm super happy you're here. This is a fun week. Have you ever met somebody who reminds you that magic is real? That awakens you to certain parts of you that you thought, didn't belong in this reality, that made you feel insecure about life, things that seem like they were a part of your reality, but when you walk out into everyday life, it seems like, nah, this can't be it. My meetings with Donna Parker have been very magical, and she's reminded me about a very deep part of myself that I'd forgotten about. And hearing her story, how she came from this pain, this grief, this loss, to take her through the door of realizing her psychic gifts, her mediumship. It's been an amazing ride, and it's been my pleasure to be with her on this journey. So I hope you learn a lot, hear a lot, question a lot from hearing from my dear friend Donna Parker.
Thank you.
I'm so happy that you're here from across the world, from Australia. Donna is joining us, so that's why she's not next to me right now. I'm just so thrilled that you're here. You are probably one of the people who was the catalyst for the most recent version of my awakening. I had this. It was building for a really long time, and there was certain interactions that I had with you that really helped guide me through that. So super grateful for you for that. And I want to hear a little bit about your journey and how you ended up with your awakenings.
Oh, look, it's my pleasure to chat with you, Chelly. I've always been a big fan of your work, and I've known of your work for a lot longer than most people have. The beautiful thing about being a spirit channel is that I get the opportunity to tune into amazing women quite frequently, and the universe shows me these amazing visions of their potential. And yours has always been magnificent and amazing to me, and I have a lot of love for you and what it is that you're about to build for yourself, but also for the greater oneness. So thank you for inviting me to chat with you. It's a great privilege to have this opportunity.
So glad you're here.
Oh, thank you. It's funny, we were just chatting before we tuned in, and I was talking about how the spirit oneness had already started to merge with me, and they sometimes tap me on the head and kind of make jokes to lighten my energy, because when my energy is lighter, I hear them easier.
Right.
But, first let me talk about me. Please, can I talk about me first?
Let her talk about her.
Let me talk about me. Let's talk about the spiritual awakening first. My experience with the spiritual awakening is not uncommon, but it was unique to me. And I believe that that's true for everybody, that the spiritual awakening journey is always unique to the individual, because Absolutely. We are here to have our own experience, and that in itself is sacrosanct, that is sacred to you and sacred to the experience of being alive. But my particular journey was unusual in so much as it did happen progressively over a period of time, but I wasn't aware of that until the epiphany literally fell into my lap, that there's so much more to this world than what it is that we're offered. And that catalyst was the passing of a sister, of a friend of mine, a soul sister, someone who I only knew for a short time, but it was one of those relationships where I met her and I saw her and she saw me, and we understood each other. Kind of like when I met you, Chelly, like there's this understanding that there's something behind this that's greater than just the ordinary meeting of two people. And so she was a tango student of mine at the time. I was running a dance studio, And she had previously danced for Alvin Ailey, which of course is a New York New York dance company based in New York. And when I was in high school, I had this desire to be a part of Alvin Ailey's dance troupe. It was my goal as a dancer. And so when I met her, she had done that. She was the only Australian in a cast back when they used to have the rainbow colored cast. And of course, now they specialize in African American art and expression, which is so beautiful, and they do that so beautifully. I love them. I cry actually when I watch them dancing. They're so beautiful.
They're so beautiful. Yeah.
And that I'm being tapped on the head is spirit inspired. You understand that's an aspect of us that you can see on the average person when they're expressing themselves through art. Their spirit self is stepping forwards, and that's why we get the emotional responses sometimes to music and dance and art. But I met her, and she kind of had danced this, for me, ideal life. And I remember seeing her and hearing this about her and saying, wow, you're my idol. I wished I could be you. And she was one of those women who had become pregnant when she was in her early 20s, and so she gave up her career to be the mother and housewife, and she was married to a man who was quite abusive. And so she had quite an abusive experience, and this built on top of an abusive childhood. And when I met her, there was a part of me that really saw that about her. And she used to say to me, Jelly, that I'd given her back a dance and I'd given her back a life. And it used to touch me so strongly. And so anyway, for the period of time that I knew her, she jumped into any class I would let her do. All of the new projects that I started to build, she was the first person there. And at the time I had autonomic nervous system condition and I have chronic fatigue, basically. Chronic fatigue coupled with fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain syndrome. And it had actually left me with the inability to use my hands for about a year. And I'd been told by doctors that I was permanently partially disabled and I would not be able to learn how to reconnect with my limbs. And so I'd kind of come through this extraordinary experience of distress. I was married and I left the marriage because I felt that was contributing to the stress of the situation. I was fighting with an insurance company, and I'd started the dance studio while I was still quite unwell as a way of trying to financially support myself during a very difficult transition. And suddenly she appeared, and when she appeared, she inspired me in ways, she invested in me in ways I'd never thought another person was going to invest in me. And so I came from this extraordinary depressed situation with a lot of stress and not a lot of support. And she appeared like this incredible support structure for me just out of the blue. And then some circumstances in her own life flagged trouble for her and triggered her own early childhood abuse that she suffered through and was kind of sitting in the background for her. Within a month, she'd taken her own life. And so I sat with her for that whole month, and I'd visit her and we'd hang out. And when she passed away, the irony is that we were supposed to be meeting at a psychic fair. She'd never been to a psychic. And so we'd written lists together of things that we'd wanted to do together when she was feeling better. And so one of the first things we decided to do was to go and see a psychic together. And so she stood me up for the date on the day that she decided to leave the earth.
My gosh.
And the funny thing is, after that event, I went home, I found out about what had happened. And in my grief, I started to see dead people is, I guess, the best way to describe it. So I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would see a person standing at the end of my bed. And I would be, in my grief, I would be struggling with it, and Annie would appear and I would have conversations with her. And for that period of time, I actually thought I was going insane. I did not understand that what I was going through was what a lot of shamans go through, which is basically a death of the soul in a fashion, a tearing away of the veil of the stuff that you knew before in order to release the new experience. And so for me, my awakening was that. My awakening was this sudden revealing of the spirit oneness that surrounded us. And I remember in my grief having the thought that she'd taken a piece of me with her. It's almost like in her passing, I suddenly realized that I had all of this access to all of this information already, but I had been convincing myself it didn't exist for so long. And when she left, I thought, well, if she could leave, then what else is it that there is around me that is truthful, that nobody's telling me about? Like in my grief, it really pulled that out. And so I realized after I woke up, I was very lucky that, because understand, I didn't know any person who was awake at that time. I didn't know any person who was in this particular space. And so I'd said to my sister, who was having a hard time at the time, that we should go out and hang out, because like a lot of light workers, like a lot of healers, I felt it was my job to assist others when they were suffering. And so instead of telling people about this suffering, the dead people who were appearing in my bedroom, I wasn't telling anybody about it. I was sitting there in my bedroom thinking I was going insane. And so I did what most light workers do, is I put on my big girl boots and I went, okay, so who can I help? Who can I be out and be around? And so my little sister was having trouble at the time, and I'd said to her, let's go and do something together, two sisters, and hang out.
Yeah.
And so we went down to a local shopping center, shopping area, and they had a new metaphysical store opening. And so we wandered in there, and they happened to have a spread or a panel of psychic readers that were available to go and see. And there were only 2 spots left. And so I said to my sister, do you want to see a psychic? Because, you've been to one before and this has helped you. And she said, I'll only do it if you do it. And so what I did is I went to the last person, and she was a medium, and she reached across to me while I was sitting there having my experience with her. And she said, Dana, you're a natural trans medium. You need to learn how to deal with the gift because you're about to go insane.
Wow.
Me, I was, you have to understand, I didn't know about this stuff. I had no connections to this realm. I didn't understand this stuff. Like, I always suspected that this stuff existed, that the energy behind the veil was there, but I never really thought that little humble human being me had access to that. And so she'd reached across and called me a trans medium, and at the time I didn't have the confidence to ask her what that meant.
You just say, yeah, I'm that. Thanks.
It's just like, trans medium, okay, sure. And so I went home and did what most of us will do, the modern woman will do. I went home and Googled trans medium, and I found out about ectoplasm.
Yeah.
Ectoplasm is a term that relates to the interface between a medium and the spirit world. And so you can Google ectoplasm and you'll see pictures, old-fashioned pictures, where they were trying to get pictures of ectoplasm in, I think, the 1800s, the early 1900s. And what ectoplasm looks like is it looks like a veil, or it looks like a sheet over a person, but it actually allows the blending of the spirit energy with the medium, so that the medium can act like they are the spirit. And so ectoplasm, of course, most people, if you hear ectoplasm, you think Ghostbusters.
Right. That's my first thought.
Ghostbusters has done a lot for the active mediumship, in so much as it's kind of diffused this idea of ghosts being a full spectrum of different potentials. There's scary ghosts and horrible ghosts, and spirit energy can imbue, inanimate objects and move them. We call this physical mediumship when things are moved. You kind of envisage the table seances, right, where you're with the table, or you get someone to lay down and everybody tries to do the 2-finger lift. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah. Okay, so ectoplasm, that gives me a good idea of what that actually is, and something you've experienced before. And you said you experienced like running of the nose when that happened.
Yeah, so it's quite common. So I get an itchy face when I'm channeling. And quite often that's because the spirit oneness with the ectoplasm, it changes my biochemistry. And so my skin starts to get this prickly sensation, like there's something over it, like spider webs. And my instinct is to scratch at it.
Well, of course, you want to get that off. Yeah.
Well, my instinct is to get it off. But of course, it's not good for me to get it off, because the whole point of it is to merge with the spirit oneness. So if I'm interfering with it, then it kind of it can do damage to the physiology. So we're not supposed to scratch when we're channeling, but I get a runny nose. Yeah, my nose runs. So
We can get you those little mittens like the babies have, so they can't scratch their
can't
face.
scratch themselves.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah.
I love it. No,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah. And so anyway, suffice it to say, she invited me to join a spiritual development circle, and it was probably the thing that saved my life. And I'll be frank with you about that. The thing that kept me and Annie in that cycle of sisterhood was that we were both perfectionists,
Yeah.
and we were both trying to be good girls, and we were both trying to run the gauntlet of that which we've been told exists, and to put on a brave face and to be a positive light for others. But ultimately, at the end of the day, my internal self was disconnected. My internal self was struggling, and my internal self was convinced that I was not worth loving.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it took that catalyst of her passing away and me suddenly seeing dead people and having this encounter with this lady who called me a trans medium, and my curiosity to understand what was going on with me, and also that innate desire that we all have to be well. Like, the one thing I've learned as a practitioner is that there's always something deep inside of us that is quintessentially desiring awareness, is quintessentially desiring to be that light of love on this planet, and to understand that firstly, in order to be that light, I have to be that for me. And so all of the people I've worked through and assisted them with their own personal healing, they come to me and they're sitting in such despair and such frustration. And the spirit oneness has often inspired me, asked me to say to the person, I see that light within you. And if you quieten your mind and you sit with your soul, you'll see it too. And they always see it. They always find it. It's always there.
Wow.
What this modern world does, and what I discovered throughout experience, is that we're told to value things that are not particularly valuable to the soul. We're told to value love, and I do want to talk a little bit about valuing love, because love in itself is an idea as much as anything else that we hold. And so many people are in love with the idea of love that they actually miss true love.
Yeah, I see that a lot. I've done
and the awakening. We've been there, haven't we?
Been there.
We've been there. Most of the sisters that we now know and associate with, we've heard their stories. We've all been there, and some are still there. To be honest, even I sometimes still fall there and convince myself that what I am being is loving, when what I am being is actually an artificial form of love, to keep myself safe rather than necessarily whole. And that in itself is a practice that, look, I wish that my girlfriend Annie had known what I know now, because in a fashion, I know that this is not the reason why she passed, but the consequence of her passing, from my perspective, has been this massive reawakening of an aspect of me that I'd hidden since early childhood. That aspect of self that knows that humankind has within it this bright spark and this desire to be a force of good and love on the planet. I got to a point where I knew that any life that required me to suppress that was just unmanageable for me, was just inconceivable for me. And since I've done that, I've started the process of what I now call the Sacred Rose Awakening. And I know I've told you a little bit about the book that I'm writing. I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to write the thing, but it's this idea that inside of us is this seed of life, that if we allow it to be in a space of high nutrient value, if we allow it to be in rich soil, and if we water it, and if we allow it access to sunshine, then what it does is it grows nice and thick and healthy, and it blooms beautifully like a rose. And that in itself is sacred love. That in itself is you in your eternal form. That in itself is your obligation to gift to the planet. When you sit in resonance with that, then you find that you are on path and you are in that state of wholeness that allows people to access the gifts that you have available to you.
Oh, it's just bringing me back to those times I did sit and circle with you, and we worked with the Sacred Rose energy, and how It felt like home. I have a lot in common with your story. The details are wildly different. Um, the awakening stories are wildly different, but the themes are the same. Being a kid, knowing something is different, knowing that there's more to what we're seeing, knowing that it's a little different than, or maybe a lot different than what other people experience. There's this feeling of being alone in this and wanting to shove it away because you're alone if you try to keep holding on to it. And if you want to be accepted and you want to be loved, you have to put those things away. And then you realize over time that those aren't the people supposed to be in your life anyway. The people who are going to love you as you are, the ones who accept you for being a little out there and outside the box, are the ones that are really meant for you. And I would say taking the time with the sisterhood and having that nurturing energy to remember who we are was so valuable to me. And it's amazing how through your pain, the catalyst of pain is what brought you to this healing place for other people so that they could have their healing as well.
Well, it's an important thing that you touch on there, the healing of the self before healing of others.
Right.
Healing others can be very healing for you. And so, we've talked about this, about how you want to go out and you want to save the world and you want to be all of that for everybody, but
Yes.
that in itself is unsustainable while you can't keep and maintain your own energetic threshold for you. We talk a lot about boundaries in spirit work.
Yeah.
That's because we have a human condition, and the human condition allows us to manipulate reality. And that in itself comes with trauma and potential for chaos. Chaos and trauma in itself is not bad. The circumstances, for example, with Annie were traumatic for me, but the awakening moment was needed. I needed that experience in order to be my best self, in order to be able to stand fully present with you today and to fully own who I am. I don't lie to myself in the same way I used to. I don't try to dress myself up in spaces that make me beautiful on one hand but hollow in others. And that was a practice that so many women and men are in the habit of expressing. And, we often talk about our ancestral lineage. We have inherited programs that keep us in these cycles out of fear.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, our ancestors grew up in an environment that was very different to what is offered us now. Many of them truly suffered from bullying that meant that they would probably end up starving on the street if they weren't careful. They had war in their space. They had abusive relationships. Their tolerance of violence was very different to ours. But so too, they weren't overstimulated by the television and by the available stories that we have at our fingertips, that tell us all of these amazing things. We have cells, of course, in our bodies that when we watch things, there's aspects of us that become like that which we observe, that which we watch, that which we are around. So if I'm in front of the TV constantly, for example, I'm going to have trouble relating to real people because real people are much more simpler than that. There are a lot. I mean, people can be complex, of course, but the act of associating and connecting with someone is relatively straightforward. We forget this, though, because we're constantly overstimulated by stimulus that tells us that we're supposed to be something particular in order to be acceptable. And that in itself traumatizes. It has the potential to traumatize you. It's like that saying, we all have our own particular experiences that we need to honor, but you can have a child who goes through a worn-torn experience and they come out bright, shiny stars, happy and relatively well-balanced. And you can have a person who's grown up behind the TV who has had very little real-world life trauma, and they're more traumatized than a child who's grown up in a war-torn country. We see this every day, all the time, and we need to take ownership of that. Personal awakening in a fashion is about educating the self to understand the stimulus that you're around constantly may be training you to program you in ways that allow for a more traumatic response to stimulus.
Yeah. Yes.
That in itself creates trauma for you. Trauma in itself is not necessarily a problem, except that, it becomes a case of what are you going to do about it? So you're traumatized now. You can blame all the people in the world that are traumatizing you, but at the end of the day, you're the person sitting with you. You're the only person that's the common denominator through this traumatic experience. So sometimes it's really worth asking yourself, at the end of the day, what am I going to do with this experience? Am I going to blame everybody, or am I going to sit in a space of ownership, of understanding that I'm the person who has to be present with me, loving me, and experiencing and witnessing my experience so that someone is actually looking after me? This in a fashion seems to be disconnect, but in itself, actually, it's not, it's actually a form of connection.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot of valuable information right there. And I want to go back a little bit to talking about the terminology and how it made you better understand what was going on. So you were experiencing things. You didn't understand. You'd never heard, what's a trance medium? I don't know any of this stuff before. And then Google is a great help. But there's a lot of people who are awakening right now who don't necessarily know that that's what it is, right? They have an idea, a sense that things are shifting, things are changing. And this is part of why I'm writing a book to kind of help with this process, because there's certain terms you and I throw around like nothing. And some people are like, what did you just say? So I know the importance of that terminology. Is there anything, either terminology wise, resource wise, book wise, that really helped you on your journey as you were navigating these crazy new waters that you've never could have possibly imagined you'd be in before?
Well, reading is a really great resource, partially because it's something more concrete, and quite often it's about an individual's experience of things. And so I did reach out, like John Holland was a resource. I read his Knowing, or Born Knowing, I think is actually the book. Even though I started in a spiritual development circle, I found that my access to other mediums and my access to other psychics was relatively limited, partially also because there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what psychic is, and what it's not, even amongst psychics. And so I really did reach out to what for me was a medium, the vehicle through which I could learn a little bit more about other people's experiences. And so John Holland was a very big experience for me, a very big source for me in the beginning, because he has a lot of books. James Van Prague, I also liked his stuff in the beginning. Lisa Williams is also she's a teacher of mine. I am actually certified underneath her international school. So these individuals are publicly available, and they all have books. And so I really reached for the things that were available to me. From that perspective, I've always had a curiosity in other spaces that, interestingly enough, may not seem related, but I'm also interested in like brain science and neurology, mostly because of the injury that I had, the autonomic nervous system injury, and the hand issue that no longer plagues me in the same way. And that's because I understand that there's a lot of gains at the moment to be made between the spiritual world and what is being offered from spiritualists, and the modern scientific approach to the nature of things. And so quantum mechanics and quantum physics interest me, but I don't really have the headspace to read it. So I've reached out to things like The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Dodge, and things that relate to the human organism. Interestingly enough, even though they appear scientific, for me, they're spiritual texts. Because if you read the stories underneath them from the perspective of the human spirit, you can become inspired to understand how this works for you. The thing that happened when Annie died and the veil dropped is I became really aware that it's not that there's a separate world that I joined. It's actually that I was already a part of that world, but I was separating myself from it. And so from that perspective, any source for me that actually tackles the human condition, for me, is a spiritual text. If you're into past life regression, for example, Michael Newton has a couple of really great books. Dolores Cannon is also a very big source with regards to understanding how the incarnation cycle works and these particular things. So, I'd be lying if I gave you just one person who's been influencing me. The spirit pathway that I've been trained, and I'll get to that in a minute, I can feel them tapping on me on the head. Is that we have these human resources and the human condition, but I also now have access to a greater intelligence that comes through my own soul's knowledge. And so meditation in itself is the access point to the soul self. I call it the mind gate. Meditation in itself is the way to access that aspect of you that knows more than what it is your conscious mind, the prefrontal cortex, tells you is available to you. Things like gratitude practice can be an amazing teacher, and not because we all need to be more grateful for what we have, which is of course an expression of humility, but also because quite often we don't understand fully how it is that things that distress us might actually be a blessing in disguise.
Right.
And so a good, stable, regular gratitude practice, when I can reach for gratitude for the things I don't like about my life, because I know that on some level they can be giving me something that I need right now, then I truly have transcended the human condition that believes that I'm in control of everything, and that as soon as I want something, it's in my best interest, because there is a greater intelligence out there that we can all connect into that assists me to understand that there's a bigger picture here that is of service to me. Me losing my hands was one of the best things that ever happened to me, but at the time I suffered.
Of course. How can you not? It's something that's taken away from you that you've taken for granted. So that gratitude practice becomes even deeper when you say, I can use my hands every day. That's incredible. And how many of us look at our hands every day and say that? So it gives you that perspective, and that really is a beautiful thing.
It definitely changes your approach to housework. It used to take me a full day to be able to change the sheets on my bed, and so now when I change the sheets on my bed, it's exciting to me to be able to do that. It definitely changes your perspective. And so am I grateful for that? Hell yes. But also, I'm also grateful for the fact that not having access to my hands fully has also allowed me to understand that we have much more power to be able to rewire our association with the external world. It's also helped me understand a lot more about labels, and how as soon as someone labels you as disabled, sometimes we fall into that label and we become the label. And there was just this inner resistance I had to that whole reality. I was in my early 30s at the time, and there was a part of me, that inner sense that just said, this is not my life. This is not it for me. This is not acceptable. This is not okay. There has to be something better out there. And that inner drive allowed me to look for new answers, look for third and fourth options, look for 5, 6 different dimensional frequencies that offer me a new perspective,
Yes.
Because our human mind does limit ourselves as soon as we label something. There's a part of us that sighs in relief and says, thank God this is a diagnosis, but diagnoses in themselves sometimes aren't that helpful when they keep you in a box that tells you that you have to be a particular way.
Can be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, at times. Wow. So Spirit was tapping you on the shoulder. Would Spirit like to have a go with us?
Spirit, it's funny. As soon as you say that, I feel this pulling sensation to be with them.
Nope. To be with, yes.
To be with them. So the energy, and I'll describe what's happening as it's happening. So as soon as I acknowledge that they want to come through, they start to step closer, and I feel this lifting. This lifting is me merging with Spirit, and as I start to speak, I'm no longer speaking as me, it's more me speaking as we. And so there's a sensation now where this is not about me, this is actually about us. I'm a collective channel. They're asking me to explain to you I'm a collective channel, which means that I tune into frequencies that relate to collective consciousnesses. And you may understand that Abraham is quite famous in the US. Definitely, he's not as well known here, but he's well known here enough. Abraham is a collective consciousness, and the collective consciousness, of course, allows us to peer into a new space of perception. When we sit in our space of potential as a human, we see ourselves as isolated and disconnected. and this is untrue. This is just a perspective. And the perspective leads to illness. The perspective leads to this belief that I'm not worth loving, that nobody is out there for me. I have to take care of myself. And in a fashion, this is true. In a fashion, this is our soul self speaking to us, that if it has to be, it's up to me to take the steps, because I am in the seat of power. But I'm not in the seat of disconnect. I'm always connected. There's always an aspect of me that is known, that is heard, that is seen, that is a part of a greater picture. For example, we talk about the sacred feminine a lot, and the aspect of self that knows that you're a woman knows what that is. And so when I channel for the Sacred Sister Soul Circles, for example, I'm stepping into the aspect that is the sacred feminine. And so from there we channel, and from there we gift information that serves a greater oneness, because we all need to hear certain things about ourselves that are true, that are universally accepted as a bigger picture and important for a bigger crew. We all have this yearning to be a part of an aspect of self that serves the greater oneness. We all have that yearning. And so few of us actually know what to do with that yearning. And that in itself is a gift, because the yearning itself drives curiosity, and curiosity is the soul's ability to ask for what it is that it craves. And what it craves is wholeness, completeness, oneness, to be connected. We're always there. We are always there. In a split second, you can convince your humble mind that you are there. All it takes is for you to understand how to meditate and to bring yourself to that greater oneness. What I do at the moment is my gift to the world, but I'm not uncommon. There are a lot out there who know how to channel. It's just that they don't call it for what it is. And that in itself is unfortunate, but it is the way it is. Yes. Because at the moment we are in denial of self, and denial of self is a lack mentality that prevents the sacred rose from being able to bloom.
Wow. That was pretty phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that. I felt my heart open this much more, just listening to it. I heard of myself so much in those words, and I feel comforted by them. I'm going to listen to it again and again just to make sure I got everything.
That's why we always record the channels.
That's why we record the channels. Wow.
They're sending you a lot of love. They're sending all of the listeners a lot of love. Love is the currency, you understand? It's the only currency that matters. Our value structure has to be loving, because loving is our comfort. Loving is our surrender. Loving is our truth. Loving is our inner knowing. Love in its vibration, in its truest vibrational form, is healing. And we are here to heal. The physical condition is distressing for most of us on a cellular level. We've inherited baggage that doesn't belong to us, and we struggle with this. The soul has to learn firstly about the baggage, which is why we spend most of our childhood struggling through it. And then from that perspective, if we are able to embrace a loving perspective for others as well as our souls, then we're able to then truly embrace the joyous life that's available to all of us. Let's face it, the abundance is around us.
It is. It's just a matter of having the eyes to see it. Well, we are reaching the end of our time here together, and I'm sorry it went so quickly, but I just want the audience out there to know how they can get a hold of you, how they can work with you, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us.
That's fine. So I'm available for one-on-one coaching. I do have a coaching program called Inspired Life, and I have a couple of positions there still open for people who are interested in expanding themselves in the soul space to understand more about how to awaken their intuition and to step into that in a loving way. Love, of course, is the key. Inspired life is the vision, is the aspect of self where you're merged fully with the present self as much as with that spirit oneness, and walking hand in hand with that is an inspired life where you're available to be as you are, but also to be of service to others. So that's mostly what I offer. I also do one-on-one sessions and readings, so soul readings, and you can book that online via www.dana, that's D-A-N-A, spiritbutterfly.com. But I also am on Facebook, and I also have a group called the Sacred Sister Soul Circle that I invite any woman interested in learning a little bit more about your intuition and how to connect in with the sisterhood we've been speaking to today. We have a private Facebook group at the moment for it, but we'll be building a platform with a membership base at some point when the timing is right. So if you'd like to tune into that, Facebook, just Google Sacred Sister Soul Circle.
And I recommend that you do. I found a lot of value from that. So Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. And thank you, Donna, for being here on Lighthouse Conversations.
Thank you, Chelly. I love your work and I love this business. So thank you.
Oh, so much love for you. Thank you for listening to Lighthouse Conversations. If this show resonates with you, it would mean so much to have you rate, review, and share. Don't forget to follow us at chellycanales.com and on social media.